Hi, friends. Welcome to Library. We are about to dive into Chapter 12 of Lions and Liars, A Failure to Communicate. And Frederick and all of Cabin 13 with Specs and the Professor and Ant Bite and Nosebleed, they have kind of had a bonding moment where they got to know each other a little better. And Frederick got to walk off some steam. And now we're going to get into day 2 of camp. Frederick's mom was huge. Way, way too big. Or maybe Frederick was too small. Yeah, that was it. He was the size of an actual flea, and his mom was coming at him, her gigantic feet making the earth shudder beneath him. Mom? Frederick said. She was shaking a can of Raid, the metal ball inside it clacking against the container. Mom, don't spray me, Frederick shouted. It's me, Frederick. But she didn't hear him. Everything's ready, Aunt Bite's voice said. You've got to wake up. No! Frederick yelled, and the walls of his nightmare collapsed like a house of cards. Then someone was shaking his shoulder, and he opened his eyes to see the daylight filled the cabin, and Aunt Bite actually was standing over him and speaking. Kay, Frederick yawned hugely. Wake up, he repeated, and on autopilot his body pushed itself up and swung his legs over the side of the bed. He groaned as he straightened out his stiff back and arms and legs. The mattress was almost as uncomfortable as sleeping in the bottom of Mr. Mincy's boat. We slashed the tires on all the trucks, Aunt Bite said. Huh? Frederick moaned through another yawn. And cut the phone line, Aunt Bite said. Gosh, that must have been hard work, Frederick said with admiration, and then he crashed backward on his bed and fell asleep again. Hey! Aunt Bite snapped his fingers in front of Frederick's face. Are you awake? Nuh-uh, Frederick said. He wasn't awake. He'd gone from one nightmare to a different one, where Aunt Bite was admitting to committing some terrible crime. That was so stressful, Frederick thought. Wake up, Aunt Bite said. Do you hear me? We've got everything ready to go. Frederick was slowly realizing that he was not asleep and this was not a dream. Ant Bite, the real Ant Bite and not Dream Ant Bite, had just told him they'd slash the tires and cut the phone line. Frederick clutched a handful of his thin sheet. Then he opened his eyes and waited for Ant Bite to come into focus. You cut the phone line, Frederick said from the safety of his mattress. Ant Bite nodded. And you slashed the tires, Frederick said. And we broke into Eric's office and got some supplies. Ant Bite nodded again. But why? Frederick said. Why would you do that? Ant Bite tilted his head to the side in confusion. We've been getting everything ready to go, he said. To go on the cruise? He added when Frederick didn't respond. We? Frederick sat up, still clutching his sheet, and looked around the cabin. The professor was stuffing socks into the corners of an already full duffel bag. Specs was standing beside the window, peering out at the yard beyond, like he was keeping lookout. Nosebleed sat at the edge of his bed with a worried wrinkle between his eyes. He had a fat backpack, the straps already over his shoulders. You think we're going on a cruise? Frederick said as he started to understand. Today? He said. You think we're going on a cruise today? Frederick's memories of the night before were fuzzy and the edge around the edges, but obviously somewhere along the way there had been a massive misunderstanding. He had thought, no, he had known that what they were doing last night was fantasizing about running away to go on a cruise, imagining something they were never going to do. Now Aunt Bite was standing beside Frederick's bed. He held the strap of a small shoulder bag out to Frederick. I packed your stuff, he said. We even found some batteries for your flashlight. Eric's nose hair trimmers had double A's. Specs said gleefully from his station by the window. The professor lifted a finger and smiled. Had, he said. Frederick scrambled off the bed and backed away from the bag like it held live spiders. We can't. We can't just go, Frederick said. Why not? The professor asked. Why not? Frederick repeated faintly. And there were so many reasons why not that his brain had a system overload as it tried to process them all. For starters, they needed to eat breakfast, and after breakfast, what were they going to do? Walk to Port Verde Shoals? It took 6 freaking hours for Frederick's dad to drive there, and who knew which direction the interstate was from here? Not Frederick. What were they supposed to eat, and how were they supposed to survive while they were traveling? How were 5 kids going to get on board a cruise ship without tickets and papers? Frederick imagined sneaking onto the cruise. He imagined a voice yelling over a megaphone, "Catch those kids!" And security people in small shorts and flashing sunglasses chasing him below decks until he wound up hiding in the boiler room, wedged in the giant gears of a cruise ship engine. Bill Dretch leaping off the floor, trying to nip whatever bit of him they could reach. In Group 13's cabin, Frederick was panting as if he could hear the rat's teeth clicking right then. "Okay," he said, trying to sound reasonable. "Last night, we enjoyed talking about going on vacation. We enjoyed imagining it, but we can't actually do it." This made sense to Frederick. What the guys were suggesting was flat out impossible. When Frederick had first arrived at Camp Omagashi and decided to stay, it was because he had thought for one moment that he could do something like that. Like he, Frederick Fredrickson, could have an adventure and become someone special. He had been wrong. People like him, fleas, they didn't do things like that. Adventures didn't work out for them. He looked at the others, expecting to see the effect of his words, expecting to see their excitement dim as they realized he was right. Their expectant faces looked right back at him, undimmed. And Frederick realized a crucial mistake in his reasoning. He couldn't have an adventure. These guys, though, had gotten up before dawn so they could slash tires, break a window, steal the batteries from a man's nose hair trimmers, and cut off an entire camp from civilization. And now they were going to go on vacation. "Oh, brother," Frederick said, looking at their faces. He shook his head to clear it. Maybe this was why he didn't have real best friends. Because when the time came to have an adventure or do something awesome, they were all ready to go and he wasn't able to follow. He couldn't keep up, couldn't hang. The guys in Group 13 were about to realize that, and then Frederick would be back where he started, alone. "Dash is right," Nosebleed said suddenly. "What if we get caught?" "Yes," Frederick said, "exactly." "So what if we get caught?" Specs said. "Are you scared of getting caught?" "No." Nosebleed shifted, and the bed springs creaked beneath him. Specs tapped the plastic wand that opened and closed the blinds and threw Nosebleed one of his practiced sneers. "It's just," Nosebleed hitched the straps of the backpack up, "I've never been in trouble before." "You've never been in trouble?" Frederick said. "Then why are you even here?" Nosebleed shrugged. "My grandma and teacher thought I'd like camp. They thought I could do this weekend camp and see if I like it before I do a long summer camp next year. Like a test run." He paused. "And I do like it." "It's a discipline camp," Frederick said. "Why'd you come to a discipline camp?" "It's more like a transformational camp," the professor said. "Like a personal development thing." "You should stay," Aunt Bite said to Nosebleed. Nosebleed looked relieved. "But I'm going," Aunt Bite said. "I'm going," Specs said quickly, as if someone had suggested that he was too scared to go. "I want to see the chocolate fountain," the professor said, as if that made his decision. Nosebleed slid the straps of his backpack off his shoulders. "And I can cover for you," he said, back to his cheerful self. "I'll say that you're all in here throwing up and it smells terrible, so no one can come in. And that'll buy you a little more time." The professor nodded and zipped up his bag with a jerk. "They've found out about the trucks," Speck said sharply. His eyes were narrowed as he peered out the window. Frederick was in his socks. His shoes were on the floor by his bed. Had he taken them off last night? He didn't remember. He sat down on the floor and stuffed his feet into his shoes. "Finally," Aunt Bite said, watching Frederick. "Let's do this." Frederick didn't answer, letting Aunt Bite think he was putting on his shoes so he could run away. He pushed himself to his feet and headed for the door. Things had gone too far. He couldn't run away from camp. He couldn't hike to Port Verde Shoals without an adult. He couldn't because he couldn't. He'd had enough, and it was time to go home. He would find Benjamin and make him understand that he was Frederick Fredrickson. He'd tell him things only the real Frederick would know. Hey, wait up, Aunt Bite called. Frederick opened the door and stepped into the narrow porch. A blur flashed across his vision, and the next thing he knew, a rubber ball was slamming into his stomach. Urgh! Frederick doubled over. His knees hit the porch boards. Rise and shine, maggots, a voice said. Frederick clutched his stomach and looked up. Eric stood in front of their cabin, legs planted wide, sunglasses flashing. The ball that had hit Frederick rolled off the edge of the porch and bounced away. Thunk, thunk, thunk. We're playing dodgeball this morning, Eric said. Yow. And remember, dodgeball was kind of how Frederick ended up in this whole flea situation. He got hit in the nose at school in the beginning of the story and bled all over his shirt. And then the day just went downhill from there. But our next chapter is chapter 13, Dodgeball Again. And stay tuned for next week, folks. Thank you for tuning in to Library, and I will see you next week.